Tonight, we step gently onto a land painted in shades of silver and shadow. Imagine just for a moment you're standing beneath the vast Bolivian sky, stars shimmering like tiny lanterns strung high above the Andes Mountains. The wind whispers ancient stories through rocky peaks, and somewhere far beneath your feet veins of silver thread quietly through darkened stone, waiting to tell their tales. Before we begin, if this little corner of calm has brought you any comfort, feel free to like the video and subscribe only if it feels genuine to you. No pressure. I'd also love to hear from you. Just drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is. It's always special to know we're all quietly gathered here from different corners of the world, like a family scattered but still connected. All right, now go ahead and dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan or a soft hum in the background, something that feels like home. Nestle in, get cozy, and let's ease into tonight's story together. Far before Bolivia bore its own name, back when its destiny was still folded neatly within the colonial clutches of the Spanish Empire, the glimmer of silver set everything into motion. The empire's insatiable hunger for silver turned Bolivia's landscape into a hive of bustling, smoky towns perched precariously high in the mountains, connected by steep paths and weary mules. Potosí, the jewel of these towns, was once considered the richest city in the world, its silver mines feeding empires and reshaping continents. But let's be honest, no empire ever struck silver without someone else paying the real price. That price was paid day after day by indigenous miners who trudged into the darkness, braving collapsing tunnels, dust-choked air, and dangers that historians still argue may have claimed millions of lives. Life in these mines wasn't exactly the glamorous affair that European imaginations conjured. You wouldn't find treasure chests and piles of glittering coins. Instead, there was only darkness, soot, and exhaustion. Imagine waking every morning in the pre-dawn cold, knowing your job was to squeeze into tunnels barely wider than your shoulders. And while silver lined Spain's coffers, the miners themselves rarely glimpsed its shine. Their reward, often little more than a crust of bread and a daily prayer whispered quietly to El Tío, a mythical, devilish guardian of the underworld. Yes, the miners actually left offerings of coca leaves, cigarettes and alcohol at makeshift shrines to this subterranean spirit. A bit ironic, but desperate times call for creative measures, right? But while the indigenous communities labored in shadows, another group of people were watching quietly from the sidelines, the Creoles. Born in the colonies, but descended from Spanish settlers, the Creoles occupied a tricky social position. They were educated and relatively privileged, yet always remained a step below their European-born counterparts. Picture them as the overlooked middle child in a dysfunctional colonial family, forever resentful and quietly plotting. They may have enjoyed fine clothes and attended cultured salons, but real political power remained tantalizingly out of reach, reserved strictly for Europeans fresh off the boats. Yet resentment breeds ambition. These Creoles began nurturing their own ideas about self-governance, liberty, and freedom, ideas inspired by distant revolutions in North America and France. Secret societies emerged and whispers spread discreetly through elegant ballrooms and quiet cafes. Late-night discussions grew bolder and more daring. But change was still decades away. It was not yet time to act, and certainly not openly. For now, their frustrations remained whispered secrets in dim candlelight, drifting gently through the air like smoke, unseen but unmistakable. However, the deeper and more tangible roots of rebellion would come from Bolivia's indigenous communities. While Creoles debated their rights over coffee and brandy, indigenous leaders were already organizing, rallying their communities around a shared grief, anger, and determination. The miners and laborers, despite their harsh conditions, or perhaps precisely because of them, were beginning to see through the lies of colonial promises. When the Spanish administrators preached patience, the miners whispered rebellion. When the church promised salvation, the indigenous communities remembered their suffering. Slowly, defiantly, they prepared to rise. But remember that spirit, El Tío, the miner's mythical protector. Ironically, historians still argue whether the legend was encouraged by the Spanish authorities to control workers through superstition, or if it genuinely emerged as a form of indigenous resistance. Perhaps it's a bit of both. Maybe deep underground, in those dark, oppressive tunnels praying to a rebellious spirit, was the miners' own quiet way of telling their colonial masters exactly where they could shove their authority. It might sound strange to us today, but then again, revolution often starts with whispers and quiet acts of defiance. Sometimes those whispers grow louder until they become impossible to ignore. And tonight, in the shadows beneath Potosi, you sense it, the quiet murmurs of rebellion, mingling with ancient Andean spirits, blending into a promise that something new and unstoppable was waiting just around the corner. You see, silver can buy power, but it can't buy loyalty, dignity, or freedom. And as we drift softly deeper into tonight's story, you'll discover just how powerful the desire for those elusive treasures can become. High above the winding streets and beneath skies heavy with anticipation, a quiet but profound rebellion simmers gently through the Bolivian highlands. You find yourself now outside the city of La Paz. Imagine standing at the edge of a high plateau, the chilly wind tugging softly at your clothes, whispering secrets carried across centuries. Beneath you, scattered lights glitter like jewels nestled in velvet darkness, but there's tension in the air, something electric and unresolved. This feeling isn't new. It began centuries earlier, embodied by a single name that still echoes powerfully through Bolivian history: Túpac Katari. It's 1781 and the Andes are buzzing with unrest. Túpac Katari, born Juliana Paza, isn't your typical revolutionary figure, not a general trained in distant academies, nor a wealthy Creole intellectual, but rather an indigenous leader, deeply connected to his land culture and the bitter realities faced by his people. His name itself, Katari, was inspired by Túpac Amaru, the legendary Inca leader whose own rebellion flared fiercely against Spanish control in neighboring Peru. Perhaps it's fitting Túpac Katari's rebellion, like Amaru's will, capture imaginations and nightmares alike. You might smile slightly at the irony. Túpac Katari wasn't destined to lead rebellions in the eyes of the Spanish. He was, after all, just a humble merchant and farmer in his early life, quietly bartering goods in local markets. But beneath that quiet exterior burned a fury and resolve sharpened by years of witnessing injustice. You could say Katari traded in potatoes, grain, and ultimately revolution, a curious combination of goods that history often forgets to mention. His rebellion begins not as a distant rumble, but as a powerful storm suddenly and violently enveloping La Paz. Imagine for a moment the sheer audacity of his act. With thousands of indigenous warriors at his side, Katari surrounds the city, cutting it off from food supplies and hope. Historians still argue whether his primary goal was independence, equality, or simply revenge for centuries of oppression. Regardless, his demands were clear enough: an end to Spanish exploitation, acknowledgement of indigenous rights, and recognition of their cultural autonomy. Inside the besieged city, the situation quickly turned desperate. Food became scarce, fear blossomed, and confusion reigned. Spanish authorities frantically tried to negotiate, but Katari was steadfast. "I will return," he famously promised upon being briefly captured, "and I will be millions." Those words weren't mere bravado, they became a chilling prophecy for Spanish authorities, echoing through time as a rallying cry. Katari wasn't bluffing. After a daring escape, he returned stronger, more resolute, and increasingly confident that his siege would inspire indigenous peoples throughout the Americas. While we often hear of military sieges led by seasoned generals with flashy uniforms, Katari's siege had a distinctly different flavor. The warriors surrounding La Paz weren't professional soldiers, but villagers, armed primarily with tools, agricultural implements, and sheer determination. Ironically, it made them no less formidable. As weeks turned into months, the siege became one of the longest and most devastating in colonial American history. Starvation became a daily reality within city walls, and Spanish authorities began desperately bartering their prized silver for scraps of food smuggled in under cover of darkness. Now here's a quirky historical tidbit for you. During the siege, Spanish defenders even resorted to using dried llama meat secretly hidden in church basements. Imagine the desperation. It's difficult not to smirk, imagining the solemn priest opening the sanctuary doors only to reveal rows of dried llama strips dangling from the ceiling. Times were tough, and desperate defenders made unusual but practical allies in livestock snacks. Despite Katari's determination, relief eventually came, not from surrender or negotiation, but from reinforcement armies called in from nearby regions. The siege lifted, Katari was captured again, and this time, tragically executed. Yet even in death his prophecy lingered. Túpac Katari had sparked something monumental. Indigenous consciousness had awakened irreversibly. And while the rebellion was violently crushed, its echo never faded entirely. It settled into Bolivian culture memory, and resistance like a flame that flickers quietly beneath cold ashes, ready to flare up again when the time is right. And indeed, generations after Katari's death, his legend continued to inspire revolts and uprisings. His words, "I will return and I will be millions," weren't merely poetic. They became a literal prophecy manifesting over and over again in Bolivian history. Historians still argue whether Katari's rebellion marked a turning point or simply another tragic footnote, but Bolivians know better. They understand something deeper. Katari's spirit never truly left. Even now, Bolivian indigenous movements frequently evoke his name and legacy, knowing it carries the power of resilience, rebellion, and renewal. So tonight, as you stand on that high plateau outside La Paz, you can almost hear Katari's quiet voice mingling with the wind, carried gently through the valleys and canyons below. You realize that history isn't only found in books. Sometimes it lives in whispers, in silent vigils, in quiet but stubborn acts of defiance that ripple endlessly forward. As we drift slowly toward the next chapter, remember Katari's echo. Sometimes losing a battle is precisely how you win a war, and sometimes the quietest whispers are the ones powerful enough to move mountains. The air has settled now, but the undercurrents of change ripple quietly beneath the surface. As you trudge along narrow cobbled streets, soft lantern light flickering against the damp stone walls, you can almost hear the low murmur of secrets shared in hushed voices behind curtained windows. This isn't the roar of battle, it's something subtler, yet no less potent. Across Bolivia, in the grand colonial cities, where Creoles sip strong coffee and debate the latest Enlightenment treatises, a new kind of rebellion is brewing. The whisper of freedom drifts like smoke through candlelit salons, spreading quietly but irresistibly. You find yourself in Sucre, the old capital, then called Chuquisaca, where a certain tension electrifies the air. In 1809, here, Creoles, those native-born descendants of Spanish settlers, have grown restless. They're educated, fluent in the language of liberty, and deeply inspired by the revolutions unfolding across the Atlantic. The American colonies have declared independence, France has overthrown its monarchy, and these ideas like rogue sparks leap across the ocean and into Creole minds. But as always, the question lingers, what does freedom truly mean for a society so deeply entangled in colonial hierarchies? The revolutionary groups here, often gathering behind closed doors, navigate a labyrinth of risk and hope. Their meetings resemble secret clubs where impassioned speeches mix with the clink of wine glasses. Imagine them clad in finery, yet gripping tightly to banned pamphlets discussing the rights of man, even as indigenous peoples and mestizos are systematically excluded. Historians still argue whether these early conspirators sought genuine equality or merely the replacement of one ruling elite with another. Were their actions acts of true liberation or just class rebellion disguised in lofty rhetoric? The debate lingers, but the impact is undeniable. These conversations plant the seeds for Bolivia's eventual fight for independence. What's fascinating is the contrast between these polished salons and the rugged highlands, where indigenous communities simmer with their own demands. While Creoles debate constitutional rights, indigenous peoples continue to suffer exploitation, forced labor, and cultural erasure. Yet despite this divide, revolutionary ideas seep slowly downward. The concept of rights begins to morph, stretching its meaning to include not only European-descended elites, but also the broader population. Here's a quirky detail. Some of these early Creole revolutionaries were surprisingly obsessed with European fashion trends, so much so that they risked attracting Spanish suspicion simply by their attire. Apparently wearing the latest French-style powdered wig or carrying a revolutionary pamphlet could both mark you as dangerous. Imagine the absurdity being hunted not just for your ideas, but for your taste in hats. Meanwhile, the Creoles' revolutionary fervor wasn't uniform. Some were cautious, fearful of Spanish reprisals, while others grew bolder. This uneasy mix gave rise to underground conspiracies that historians still debate. Were these early uprisings driven more by local politics' personal ambition, or a true yearning for justice? The truth probably lies somewhere in the tangled middle. Amidst all this, a quiet tension simmers between the Creoles and indigenous populations. While both groups yearn for change, their visions often clash. The Creoles imagine a republic modeled on European ideals, where power remains firmly in the hands of the educated elite. Indigenous peoples envision something more profound: recognition, rights, and respect for their ancestral lands and customs. Yet what unites these disparate groups is the slow-burning hope that freedom is possible even if its shape remains unclear. As you sit by a dimly lit fire tonight, hearing the faint echo of whispered plans and daring dreams, you grasp the delicate fragility of this moment. It's a dance of shadows and light where every step forward is tentative, uncertain, but charged with potential. And remember that curious contrast: the refined Creole salons humming with European philosophy, and the rough mountain villages where indigenous songs tell stories of endurance. Both worlds are connected by a single thread: the promise of a new Bolivia, a land where silver no longer chains its people, and where whispered hopes might one day shout freedom aloud. As the early 19th century dawns, the simmering tensions in Bolivia reach a pivotal moment, an ignition sparked not by grand armies or thunderous declarations, but by a quiet yet profound event in the city of Chuquisaca. You find yourself once more in this dusty colonial town, its streets winding past crumbling cathedrals and government buildings, where everyday life carries the uneasy weight of change. It is May 1809, and the air is thick with anticipation, nervous energy, and the scent of smoldering coal fires. The Chuquisaca Revolution unfolds here, a revolt that seems at first glance like a simple protest against a new Spanish decree, but quickly transforms into a catalyst for something much larger. Locals rise up against the appointment of a new viceroy imposed by Napoleon's invading forces in Spain, rejecting the authority of what they view as a corrupt and illegitimate regime. What began as a reaction to European power struggles morphs swiftly into a bold assertion of local self-rule. Historians still argue whether the Chuquisaca Revolution should be seen as the first real step toward Bolivian independence, or merely a conservative movement to protect traditional rights under Spanish rule. Was it a true bid for freedom, or an attempt by local elites to seize power in a moment of imperial weakness? This question echoes through academic debates like a restless ghost, impossible to lay to rest completely. But for those living through it, the distinction mattered less than the chance to challenge the status quo. In the thick of the revolution, Creoles and indigenous peoples briefly find common cause, united against the overreach of colonial authority. But the alliance is tenuous, more a marriage of convenience than shared vision. You can almost hear the whispers behind closed doors, the cautious discussions about who truly holds power and what the future might hold. This fragile cooperation foreshadows Bolivia's long and winding path to independence, one marked by both solidarity and fragmentation. Here's a historical quirk for you during the uprising. Some participants reportedly used the ringing of church bells to signal the start of their revolt. Now consider that church bells intended to call the faithful to worship instead became the call to arms, an ironic twist where instruments of peace became heralds of rebellion. It's a little like a bedtime lullaby suddenly transforming into a battle cry, unsettling but undeniably effective. The uprising in Chuquisaca doesn't remain isolated for long. News spreads swiftly, carried by merchants, travelers, and revolutionary sympathizers to other cities, including La Paz and Cochabamba. Each community reacts differently. Some join the cause with fervor, while others hesitate, fearful of the consequences. The revolutionary spirit, though still fragile, has ignited a spark that cannot be easily extinguished. Yet despite the growing unrest, Spanish authorities regroup and launch countermeasures. Armed clashes erupt, leaders are arrested or exiled, and a heavy hand descends on the cities. But repression breeds resistance. The momentum from Chuquisaca injects energy into Bolivian revolutionary movements, inspiring further uprisings and fueling debates about identity, sovereignty, and rights. For you lying comfortably as this story unfolds, it's worth pondering the nuance of this moment. Revolutions are rarely neat or straightforward. They are messy, complicated, and often contradictory. The Chuquisaca Revolution embodies this complexity, a moment when oppressed peoples began to assert themselves, but also when old hierarchies struggled to adapt or survive. It's a reminder that history doesn't follow a simple script, but twists and turns like the mountain paths of the Andes. As the bells of Chuquisaca fade into the night, you feel the pulse of a country awakening, caught between the weight of its past and the promise of a future still uncertain. The revolution's echoes drift softly, mingling with the wind, inviting you to lean in closer and listen to the unfolding story of a people daring to dream beyond their chains. As the revolution's smoke continues to rise over Chuquisaca and La Paz, you find yourself drawn to another corner of Bolivia, Cochabamba, a city nestled amid lush valleys and fertile lands where a different kind of rebellion quietly takes shape. Here the streets hum not only with the footsteps of soldiers or the rallying cries of men, but also with the determined voices of women whose stories have too often been whispered in the margins. Tonight, let's lean close and listen to their unyielding spirit. You might be surprised to learn that women in Cochabamba were not mere bystanders in the fight for independence. In fact, they played pivotal roles as messengers, strategists, and even warriors. Picture a modest household where a woman, her eyes fierce and steady, wraps a musket in cloth to carry secretly, or sneaks past enemy lines to deliver vital intelligence. These acts, small and large, stitch together the fabric of resistance in ways historians have only recently begun to acknowledge. One remarkable figure emerges from this tapestry, Juana Azurduy, an indigenous mestiza, whose courage and leadership became legendary. You can almost feel the sharp mountain air as Juana rides through rugged terrain, rallying troops, inspiring courage with the steady beat of her horse's hooves echoing across valleys. She fought not only for independence, but also for recognition of indigenous and mestizo contributions to Bolivia's future. Some even say her fierce defiance could have scared off a whole battalion. Imagine that a woman leading the charge when most armies preferred to look the other way. Historians still debate Juana's true impact. Was she a symbol elevated after the fact, or a genuine military leader whose strategic mind shaped key battles? Perhaps the truth lies somewhere in between, but her legacy remains powerful, a reminder that the struggle for freedom was not the sole domain of men in polished uniforms. What's delightfully quirky is that Juana was said to use a mixture of traditional indigenous tactics and European military training, blending them in a way that confused her enemies. Think of her as a revolutionary mashup, combining guerrilla warfare with the discipline of formal battle lines, a tactic ahead of her time, and frankly, quite cool. It's like mixing your morning coffee with a shot of espresso, a jolt of unexpected energy that keeps things interesting. Women like Juana weren't just fighting alongside men, they challenged the very social order that sought to confine them to domestic spheres. In towns and villages, women organized supplies, cared for the wounded, and maintained morale. They forged alliances, smuggled messages, and sometimes wielded weapons themselves. This female front was crucial to sustaining the revolutionary momentum that men alone could not have maintained. Of course, this role of women in Bolivia's independence struggle is only now gaining deserved recognition. For many years, traditional narratives sidelined their contributions, focusing narrowly on male military leaders and politicians. Yet the voices of these women resonate, still woven into the rhythms of Bolivian folk songs, oral histories, and family tales. Their courage whispers through the valleys and lingers like the scent of blooming coca plants, subtle but unmistakable. So as you settle deeper into your cozy space tonight, let your mind wander to those brave women of Cochabamba. Imagine the rustle of their skirts blending with the clatter of muskets, their whispered plans beneath starlit skies, their quiet strength fueling a revolution that refused to be silent. It's a story of resilience, complexity, and unexpected heroes, a gentle reminder that history's heartbeat often pulses strongest in the spaces we least expect. And as you drift towards sleep, remember this: revolutions are never just battles and treaties. They are also stories of everyday people, of women who dared to break the mold and change the course of a nation. It's comforting in a way to know that even the mightiest struggles begin with quiet acts of courage. The Andean mountains seem to hold their breath as you watch the arrival of a man whose name rings across Latin America like thunder: Simón Bolívar. Imagine the dust rising from the horses' hooves, the swirl of banners catching the sharp sunlight, and the weight of expectation pressing on every soul who glimpses the liberator's determined gaze. Bolívar, already a legendary figure in the northern parts of South America, rides into Bolivia carrying a mixture of hope, ambition, and complicated politics that would both inspire and unsettle the region. Bolívar's campaign through Bolivia in the early 1820s was dramatic, theatrical, even though not without its ironic twists. Here is a man hailed as a hero of freedom, yet his arrival complicated local ambitions and stirred tensions between indigenous groups, Creole elites, and the newly forming government. You could say Bolívar was both a unifying force and a disruptive presence, like a guest at a family reunion who starts rearranging the furniture before anyone's had coffee. At first glance, Bolívar's vision was grand and sweeping: a united independent Latin America bound together by shared ideals of liberty and republicanism. But Bolivia was different, layered with unique social fabrics and deep-rooted indigenous cultures. Bolívar's centralized and often rigid ideas sometimes clashed with local desires for autonomy and recognition. Historians still argue whether his influence helped build Bolivia's foundations or overshadowed indigenous leadership and grassroots movements. Was Bolívar the liberator Bolivia needed, or just a chapter in a longer, more complex story? During Bolívar's time in Bolivia, he issued decrees aimed at abolishing slavery, promoting education, and restructuring governance. Noble intentions, certainly, but the practical realities were far messier. You see, Bolívar's reforms sometimes alienated local elites who feared losing their privileges, while indigenous populations remained skeptical of promises made by a Creole aristocrat speaking in Spanish rather than Quechua or Aymara. It was a delicate dance, and Bolívar occasionally stepped on toes, whether intentionally or not. Here's a quirky little aside: Bolívar was known for his extravagant tastes and was once said to have owned a gold-plated sword. Practical, probably not, but symbolic of his larger-than-life persona. One wonders if he ever used it to slice through red tape rather than enemies, perhaps a metaphor we can appreciate in bureaucracies everywhere. Despite the complexities, Bolívar's military campaigns were crucial in defeating Spanish royalist forces entrenched in Bolivia's rugged landscapes. Battles raged across the Altiplano and valleys where harsh weather and difficult terrain tested even the most seasoned soldiers. Bolívar's army included diverse fighters, indigenous warriors, Creole officers, and mercenaries from abroad, each with their own motivations and hopes. The fusion of these groups on the battlefield reflected the paradox of Bolivia's independence, a shared struggle with differing visions. Yet Bolívar's presence also exposed cracks beneath the revolutionary veneer. His centralized power struggles with local leaders, and his insistence on maintaining control sparked debates about what independence really meant. Was it the creation of a new elite replacing old colonial rulers, or a true redistribution of power? These questions lingered, leaving historians to ponder Bolívar's legacy in Bolivia as both liberator and potential autocrat. As you sink deeper into the night's calm, imagine Bolívar's figure silhouetted against the vast Andes, a man caught between towering mountains and towering expectations. His story is not just one of heroism, but also of complexity, contradiction, and the messy realities of revolution. It reminds us that even the greatest heroes walk paths paved with compromises, mistakes, and contested dreams. And as you drift towards sleep, take a moment to appreciate the irony of Bolivar's arrival, a liberator whose freedom came wrapped in complications, much like the very land he sought to free. It's a gentle reminder that history is rarely simple, but always worth exploring, especially when tucked beneath the quiet stars of the Bolivian night. You find yourself now on the jagged Altiplano, a high, wind-swept plateau where the earth feels ancient and time slows to a crawl. The sky stretches wide and pale above you, punctuated by distant peaks dusted with snow. Here, amid the rocky landscape, the struggle for Bolivia's independence takes on its most tangible form: battle. But these aren't grandiose clashes with endless armies. Rather, they are rugged, gritty fights fought by a patchwork of warriors shaped by the land itself. The Battle of Junin and the Battle of Ayacucho, though technically outside Bolivia's current borders, were pivotal in securing independence across the region, including Bolivia. But within Bolivia itself, smaller skirmishes and uprisings unfolded in harsh conditions where the land often felt like another enemy. Imagine soldiers, many of them indigenous fighters, wearing traditional ponchos and wielding a mix of muskets and farming tools, struggling not just against royalist forces but against biting cold and thin air. The terrain demanded resilience as much as courage. Historians still debate the significance of these battles in shaping Bolivia's independence. Were they decisive turning points or part of a broader, slower process of liberation? Some argue that the victories were symbolic, igniting hope rather than delivering immediate freedom. Others emphasize the strategic genius of local commanders who used intimate knowledge of the terrain to outmaneuver better-equipped Spanish forces. What's clear is that the Altiplano itself was a silent partner in these struggles, its cliffs and valleys shaping outcomes in unexpected ways. A quirky tidbit: during one battle, it's said that a troop of Valamas, startled by gunfire, stampeded through a royalist camp, causing chaos and confusion. If you ever think armies are purely about guns and tactics, think again. Sometimes nature plays its own hand in history in ways historians only reluctantly admit. These battles also highlight the complex makeup of Bolivia's revolutionary forces. Indigenous groups, Creole militias, and foreign volunteers mingled uneasily on the battlefield, united by a common enemy, but divided by differing goals. Some fought for true social change, others for the preservation of their class or local autonomy. The alliances forged in the heat of battle were often fragile and pragmatic. Moreover, the aftermath of conflict brought challenges as well. Even victorious armies faced difficulties maintaining order and governance in the rugged highlands. Supply lines were strained, local loyalties shifted, and rival factions jockeyed for power. The very geography that gave them advantage in battle also complicated efforts to build a stable, unified nation. As you feel the cool night air around you, imagine the muffled sounds of muskets and cries fading into the vast stillness of the mountains. These battles, etched into rocky soil and whispered in winds, were more than just military confrontations. They were struggles over identity, sovereignty, and the very meaning of freedom. The Altiplano's harsh beauty mirrors the bittersweet nature of Bolivia's fight for independence, majestic and unforgiving, filled with triumph and hardship in equal measure. It reminds you that history is never clean or simple, but a tapestry woven from many threads, some shining bright, others dark and tangled. And so as you settle further into the night, the stories of these battles mingle with the mountain air, inviting you to rest with the knowledge that freedom was fought for not only in grand declarations, but in the rugged, enduring heart of the land itself. The early days of Bolivia's independence were marked by a curious, uneasy dance, a partnership between indigenous leaders and Creole revolutionaries that was more alliance of necessity than heartfelt unity. You find yourself walking through a small mountain village where the air is thick with the scent of burning coca leaves and fresh earth, and the faces you pass tell stories of resilience, suspicion, and cautious hope. It's here in these remote valleys and dusty towns that the revolutionary spirit must grapple with deep divisions. This uneasy union was a complicated affair. On one side, indigenous leaders brought the energy of centuries-old resistance, the fierce loyalty of communities bound to their ancestral lands, and a vision of self-determination rooted in traditions. On the other, Creole revolutionaries sought to build new political structures modeled on European ideas of governance, freedom, and citizenship, often without fully including indigenous rights or voices. Imagine two dancers moving awkwardly to the same rhythm but stepping on each other's toes, both desperate to lead but unsure who should take the final bow. Historians still argue about the depth and sincerity of this partnership. Was it a genuine collaboration forged in shared struggle, or a pragmatic arrangement where indigenous communities were sidelined once the immediate goal of independence was achieved? The truth is layered and complex. In some regions, cooperation flourished, with indigenous leaders gaining political roles and recognition. In others, promises were broken and old hierarchies subtly reinstated. A quirky detail here is that some Creole leaders tried to adopt indigenous symbols and rituals to legitimize their rule. Think of it as early cultural appropriation, but with revolutionary flair. Wearing feathered headdresses or incorporating traditional dances at official ceremonies, they sought to bridge gaps, though sometimes these gestures rang hollow or were misunderstood. It's a reminder that symbols can both unite and divide, depending on who wields them. Yet, despite tensions, the shared struggle against Spanish colonialism created bonds that could not be easily undone. Indigenous militias fought alongside Creole armies. Revolutionary councils included representatives from different communities, however imperfectly. This fragile unity was enough to tip the balance toward independence, even if it left unresolved questions about equality and justice. The aftermath of revolution left a country grappling with its identity. Indigenous peoples faced pressures to assimilate or accept diminished roles in the new order, while Creole elites navigated how much power to share. The result was an ongoing negotiation, one that continues to shape Bolivia's politics and culture today. As you sit quietly, perhaps by a crackling fire or a softly humming fan, you sense the weight of this history pressing gently but persistently. The story of Bolivia's independence is not just about battles won or governments formed. It is about people learning to coexist, sometimes uneasily, in a shared homeland. It's a reminder that freedom is rarely clean or simple, but messy and ongoing, requiring constant work and dialogue. And so, as your eyes grow heavy and your breath slows, carry with you the image of those dancers on a mountain stage, stepping cautiously but bravely into a new dawn. Their story, full of hope and contradiction, lingers in the quiet spaces between past and future, inviting you to dream of a world where all voices might finally find harmony. The year is 1825, and Bolivia stands at a crossroads, its newly declared independence casting long shadows across the highlands and valleys. You imagine the air thick with the scent of gunpowder mingled with incense, crowds gathering in dusty plazas under skies both hopeful and uncertain. But beneath the celebrations lies a complex question historians and citizens alike still wrestle with. Was this liberation the dawn of true freedom, or simply the replacement of one set of rulers with another? After decades of struggle, the Spanish flag is lowered and the Bolivian tricolor is raised, signaling a new era. Yet the promises of equality and justice are unevenly fulfilled. The Creole elite, who orchestrated much of the independence movement, swiftly consolidate power, becoming the new masters of the land. Indigenous peoples who sacrificed much and fought fiercely often find themselves marginalized, their rights curtailed or ignored. This bittersweet outcome is a recurring theme in the revolutions of the Americas, where liberty's light shines unevenly across different groups. Historians still debate whether Bolivia's independence truly liberated its people or merely shifted power dynamics. Was the revolution a social revolution that dismantled colonial hierarchies, or a political revolution preserving elite privileges? Perhaps it was a bit of both, wrapped in layers of ambition, hope, and realpolitik. Here's a quirky aside in the aftermath. Some indigenous communities continued to celebrate with traditional dances and festivals that subtly resisted the imposed political order. Imagine revelers dressed in vibrant costumes using humor and satire to poke at new authorities, a kind of cultural rebellion disguised as festivity. It's a reminder that freedom often finds its expression in unexpected forms. The new Bolivian state faced monumental challenges, building institutions, forging national identity, and reconciling diverse peoples with competing visions for the future. Land rights became a flashpoint as Creole landowners sought to maintain control, while indigenous communities demanded recognition of ancestral territories. The tension between these interests shaped Bolivia's political landscape for generations. You can almost hear the debates echoing through grand halls and humble homes, alike questions about citizenship, equality, and sovereignty that remain unresolved. This ongoing struggle is part of Bolivia's legacy, reminding us that independence is not an endpoint, but a process. As you settle deeper into the night, reflect on the layered meaning of liberation. It's not just a flag raised or a battle won, but a complex journey toward justice and inclusion. Bolivia's story invites you to consider freedom's many faces, the victories, the setbacks, and the enduring hope that drives people to keep fighting for a better tomorrow. As night deepens and the world quiets, you find yourself wrapped in the rich tapestry of Bolivia's heritage, its colors vibrant, its rhythms steady like the heartbeat of the Andes themselves. Here, the story of independence is not just history, but a living, breathing legacy that pulses through communities, songs, and the very land itself. The voices of indigenous peoples echo, still reminding us that the revolution's promises were only partially fulfilled, and its journey far from over. In modern Bolivia, the influence of indigenous culture shines brightly, from the weaving of colorful textiles to the reverberating sound of traditional instruments in city plazas. The struggles of the past continue to inspire movements today as people seek to reclaim their rights, languages, and identities within a nation that is still learning to embrace its diverse roots fully. The unfinished revolution lingers like a soft hum, inviting reflection and renewal. Historians still debate how much the original independence movement anticipated this ongoing indigenous resurgence. Was the revolution simply the first act in a longer play, or a missed opportunity to forge a truly inclusive nation from the start? Either way, Bolivia's story is a testament to resilience and the enduring power of cultural memory. A charming quirk of Bolivian identity is how traditional festivals blend indigenous beliefs with Catholic rituals, creating vibrant celebrations that defy easy categorization. Think of it as a cultural remix where ancient Andean cosmology dances gracefully with Spanish colonial legacies, producing a harmony that is uniquely Bolivian, joyful, complex, and sometimes delightfully unpredictable. As you drift toward the end of this tale, let the images soften: children playing under vast skies, elders telling stories beside flickering fires, and mountains standing eternal as silent witnesses to centuries of change. Bolivia's independence was never a single moment, but a slow unfolding, a journey marked by courage, contradictions, and hope. So tonight, as your breath slows and your eyelids grow heavy, carry with you this quiet understanding. Freedom is not a destination, but a path walked by many feet, through shadows and light across generations. Bolivia's story invites you to rest gently, knowing that even the longest journeys begin with a single step, and that the spirit of those who fought continues to guide the way. The night deepens around you, softening edges and calming restless thoughts. The stories you've traveled through of silver mines, sieges, whispered conspiracies, and fierce women warriors now fold gently into the quiet rhythm of your breath. Imagine the cool mountain air brushing softly against your skin, carrying the faint scent of blooming flowers and ancient earth. The past settles like a warm blanket, comforting and familiar as the stars shimmer gently overhead, watching over the timeless Andes. There's a softness in knowing that history is not fixed or finished, but alive, flowing like a river that carries both light and shadow. The people whose stories you've heard are with you, still in the lull of the night, in the peaceful hush before sleep. Their courage whispers encouragement, their struggles remind you of resilience, and their hopes invite you to dream. As you nestle deeper into your cozy space, let the gentle pulse of Bolivia's enduring spirit lull you toward rest. The journey continues quietly now beneath closed eyes and softened thoughts where past and present mingle in the sweetest harmony. You are safe, surrounded by stories, cradled by time. Sweet dreams, dear listener.